Gestational Diabetic. I am your host, Tracy Houston, and I am here to inform you and empower you so that you can be a confident member of your healthcare team. Quick medical disclaimer, none of the information in this podcast can be used to diagnose or treat any medical condition. If you have any concerns about your health, please discuss them with your healthcare team. Today on the episode, we have Madalyn of diabetes.rd on Instagram. I love her Instagram account. She uses it as a resource to help inform people about diabetes and that you don't have to change everything overnight. You don't have to be crazy when it comes to cutting out foods in your diet, but you can still eat the things that you love. And she does great infographics, you guys. All of her infographics are so helpful, and you can tell because the comments on it, she gets a lot of great feedback, and the work that she's doing is great. And the great thing is she's doing it just out of a passion and a love in her heart for making sure that people are informed and are aware of diabetes and what comes along with it. You know, you don't have to make these huge changes overnight. You can do this step by step. And her goal is to be encouraging and remind you that diabetes is a one-by-one situation. It is not a one-size-fits-all disease. So I had her on today because of one of the infographics that she made. She talks specifically about the keto diet and how it is not a sustainable treatment for diabetes. And so that really kind of turned some questions, and actually it was a little bit controversial on her Instagram account, some comments on the infographic. So I wanted to bring her on so she could talk a little bit more about that. And so we talked about that, as well as not associating yourself with the disease diabetes. You are not a diabetic, you have diabetes, and some other encouraging tips that she has. So let's get into it. All right, so Madalyn, thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing today?
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited.
Me too. I know. I love your Instagram account, and I love the information that you share on there because I feel like it's really helpful, and it is changing the mindset around the diabetes community, or in the diabetes community, about just how to handle and manage diabetes. So can you get us started and tell us who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my name is Madalyn Vasquez, and I'm a registered dietitian. And currently I work in an endocrinology practice where I do nutrition along with diabetes counseling. So this is, a very passionate role. It's a role that I've wanted for such a long time. And I'm so thankful that I'm able to be in this role because I'm able to impact those living with diabetes, which has always been my goal and my passion.
That's awesome. So endocrinology, so you're working just strictly with women?
So no, so I actually work with an array of individuals. So anywhere from teenagers, children, and even adults, and men and both women.
Gotcha. And so what led you to have a focus on diabetes?
So this is such a personal question, but, I like to highlight it so much because that's where my, passion is driven. So ultimately, my passion for diabetes started with my grandmother. She, had diabetes and was living with diabetes for a very long time. And unfortunately, because of her diabetes, she passed away. And that's when I decided that I wanted to, initially, my goal was to be in the culinary industry because I understood that back then, food had a huge impact in someone's life. And I also saw how food impacted the course of her disease. So ultimately, when I went ahead and I started college, I was a culinary major. And then I transitioned into a culinary nutrition major when I realized that you can actually combine the two. And that's when I learned about becoming a dietitian. And it just, everything kind of fell together and came so nicely because I was able to see that I can combine cooking along with nutrition so I can impact those that were living with diabetes. So they knew that, you can still enjoy the foods that you love especially your cultural foods, and still manage your health.
Yeah, I know. That's why, that's actually what initially caught my eye on your IG account, was that you were talking about being able to eat the same foods that you love, which I think is so important, because if a person is going to make changes to their diet, it can't just be an overhaul overnight, you know, because there's a pretty big chance that that isn't going to last long, you know. So if someone, because we have a relationship with food, right? So if we're making smaller changes, then we're able to make those changes last longer and or all in all, be healthier for the remainder of our lives, I would hope. So yeah, so with cultural foods, can I ask what's your culture?
So my family's from the Dominican Republic.
Okay. Oh, so you guys eat a lot of rice and beans, right?
Yes, we do. We eat a lot of rice and beans.
So, I mean, what other foods do you guys eat that, or meals even, that would be probably considered not so great for diabetes, or you would have to cut back on to kind of maintain the carb counts?
So this is actually a really great question, and I'm so glad that you brought it up, because what I teach my patients is that you don't necessarily have to stop eating the foods that you love, you know, just because you're diagnosed with diabetes. When I look at, you know, my grandmother and her experience, when she was diagnosed with diabetes, she was told she couldn't have rice, she couldn't have beans. You know, her idea was, I can't have sugar. So what people don't realize is that a lot of the foods that we do eat contain sugar. They naturally will turn into sugar in the body. And
Right.
one thing that I always emphasize to my patients is that sugar is sugar. You know, our body doesn't know the difference between the sugar in an apple versus the sugar in a cake. So when I work with my patients, I more or less teach them to have an understanding of the fundamentals of food, and to, you know, more or less understand what foods are going to impact the blood sugars, but how can we modify those foods and pair them in a way where we're going to achieve healthy, balanced blood sugars, because that's the goal. The goal is never to have a patient feel like they shouldn't eat a specific food that they grew up, you know, eating.
Right.
Specifically, when I think about my grandmother, like, she was raised on rice and beans. Imagine telling someone raised on rice and beans,
Yep.
you can't have rice and beans.
Yeah.
What are they going to eat? And I see that continuously. Like, it's a continuous pattern with a lot of my patients, where, you know, they hear from their doctors, or they read on the internet, or they, you know, a friend tells them, you can't have this, you can't have that, you can't have this. So in reality, it becomes frustrating to the patient, because they automatically think that all they have to eat is vegetables and protein.
Mm-hmm.
And no, the reality is you can still incorporate the carbohydrates, but it's how much you're incorporating, and the how much is going to be different for everyone. And I always emphasize that, because everyone is different and no two diabetes is the same. And I love to always emphasize to my patients, just because something worked for someone else doesn't mean that it's going to work for you.
Right. Yeah, man, I could only imagine what your grandmother felt in that moment, because essentially what that person was telling her was to let go of your culture and let go of your childhood, let go of what is essentially your life. And that is just crazy when you think about it in that context. Like, no, I can't just stop eating this. You know, it's more than just me deciding to be healthier for my life, or deciding to do what's right for my blood sugar. No, you're really asking for me, or actually telling or demanding me to let go a piece of who I am. And I think actually, if people looked at it in that context, there would be a lot more sympathy when it comes to diabetes, and changing the diet and the mindset around it, because it's a lifestyle change that needs to happen, but that doesn't mean that we have to let go of parts of who we are, you know? So that's great. And I noticed something. When you speak, you say diabetes. You don't refer to people with diabetes as diabetics. And I remember that as a post on your Instagram. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I'm so happy that you brought that up. And when I say diabetes, I refer to it as people living with diabetes. And the reason being is because you're not your disease. At the end of the day, you're still a human and you're still, a person. You have feelings and you're not your disease, and your disease shouldn't frame who you are. So those are the things that I work towards with my patients. I work towards empowering them and allowing them to understand, like, listen, you have more control over your health than you think. Regardless of what your doctor's telling you, regardless of what you're reading, regardless of what you're seeing, you have more control to manage your diabetes than you think. And this isn't going to happen overnight, because I emphasize this. It starts with the small changes, and it's very important to, reframe your mindset, because ultimately, if you're just aiming for perfection, that's where the issue is going to lie. And I always emphasize that to, my patients and my community on Instagram. It's about progression, not perfection, because diabetes is complex and it's very, difficult to live a day-to-day perfect life, because there's so many factors that can influence that, and just like diabetes, it's not just food that impacts diabetes. There's so many things that can impact someone's blood sugar. So I also review that with my patients, and I more or less give them an understanding of what is diabetes, what you have to do to successfully manage your diabetes, but also what are those physical and environmental factors that can also, influence diabetes, because it's not just the food. There's more to diabetes than just food. And I think that that's what society portrays it as, like, oh, well, you have diabetes because X, Y, and Z, when in reality, no, there's many factors that can influence that. So allowing the patient to understand that, or the person, makes such a huge difference.
Yeah. So what are some of those environmental factors? I mean, I know stress is a big one that people talk about, and also sleep. Are there any others?
So yeah, there's so many things. Like I actually posted about this recently. Someone's period can cause it. Certain medications, like I know that there's patients that will come to me with allergies, and that throws their blood sugars off. Also, if they're on steroids, or there's some medications that will cause the increase in blood sugars. So there's a lot of things, stress, like you mentioned, lack of sleep can cause it. There's so many things that people are unaware of, that it doesn't allow them to look at the bigger picture. They're just so fixated on, well, maybe it was something that I ate. Maybe I need to go low carb. Maybe I need to go keto. Maybe I need to try X, Y, and Z. Yeah. Instead of, looking at it from a critical thinking perspective, because there is a lot of critical thinking that entails into successfully, managing your diabetes and working with someone that has diabetes.
Yeah. Okay. And yeah, mentioning keto, I see when food bloggers, or actually, well, no, it's mostly food bloggers, or people that are, real gung-ho about the keto diet, when they're posting their meals and stuff on Instagram, and, they're trying to get more eyes on their Instagram account, they'll use a bunch of hashtags. And in the hashtags, they'll include diabetes, diabetic, type 1, type 2, and gestational diabetes, right? So now there's a lot of controversy around the keto diet surrounding it, I know. But, well, first of all, can you start by telling us, what does the keto diet entail? Because a lot of people, I remember when it first became like a big hype people were like, oh yeah, I could eat a pound of bacon a day and that's still keto. And it's like, yeah, you can, but that's probably not the best thing to do for you, you know? So what is the keto diet?
So I'm going to start off by giving a little history of the ketogenic diet and why it was developed. So essentially it was developed to help people that were children that were suffering from epilepsy, because being on the ketogenic diet would actually help control the seizures. But what was happening with these patients was that it was resulting into weight loss. And essentially this was because the body's using ketos as energy. So you're using fat to burn for energy instead of using sugar, which is the normal way that our body works. Gotcha. So I always say that somehow, in some way, the wellness industry got a hold of that, you know, and it was being, you know, portrayed as the magic formula to lose weight, because even other doctors would, you know, use it on other patients. So I think that ultimately it was designed for one particular intention, meaning to help from a medical nutrition standpoint for those suffering from epilepsy. And now people are using it for weight loss. So you see, you know, because it's low carb, you know, people are using it for diabetes, because it's always perpetuated that those that have diabetes should eat low carb because it's going to help manage those blood sugars. But that's not necessarily the case.
Gotcha. Yeah. And that seems like, I don't know how it is in the rest of the world, but in the United States for sure, when it comes to health and wellness and our foods and just wanting to live healthier or lose weight, anything along those lines, it seems like somebody figures something out, one thing, and then boom, it's this huge explosion. And it's a fad thing. People jump on it. Everybody's crazy about it. It's working for some. It might not work for some others, but you know, it's this huge push. And then here comes the next one, you know, so the first one kind of dies down, maybe loses a little gas, but excuse me, now with our access to internet and resources on the internet and people becoming more focused on, I know it's a trendy term right now, evidence-based research, you know, things are kind of starting to turn around a little bit, but it's so hard to reverse the first impression and the mindset that was initially put out there. You know, like when Atkins first came out, I remember I was working at Wendy's at the time. I was a teenager, and people were coming through ordering a triple burger, but with no bun. And I'm like, it was so hilarious to me. And I did not understand it at all back then, but they were like, yeah, man, no carbs. It's Atkins. It's all good. And so I was like, okay, you know, so we started putting the burgers into this little salad container or whatever, excuse me. And then Atkins actually went strong for a really long time. I didn't pay attention to it, but I know I kept hearing about it, and it's still around today. And I mean, I'm not dissing the program. I like their food and their snacks, and they have good protein shakes and all that stuff. But yeah, it seems like in America, we just have this huge push, and then it becomes a whole lot of work to try to dial that back and actually get some true logic into what's going on. Because any fad diet that comes about, I don't think anybody continues that on for the rest of their life. You know, it's within the person to decide which changes they want to make, and you know, if those changes are going to be sustainable. So yeah, I think that's what's happening with keto. But a lot of people like it, and a lot of people, it's working for them, you know, and I'm not trying to diss anybody or anything like that, but you made a post and you said specifically that the keto diet is not sustainable for treating diabetes. Is that correct?
Yes, it's absolutely not sustainable long-term. I mean, you will have some patients that you'll come across that are able to stand on keto and withstand it for maybe 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but at what cost? You know, like when I work with patients, and because I've had patients that come to me and they're like, well, I tried keto for, you know, X amount of time. I did see that my blood sugars were slightly better and I was losing weight, but it was very difficult when I was eating out because there are going to be times where you can't eat just fat and protein.
Yeah.
Because that's what the diet primarily runs off. Yes, they incorporate vegetables, but it's heavily focused on fat and protein.
Gotcha.
And then I had some patients that were experiencing very low blood sugars because they were on X amount of insulin, and then they would get on this diet, and because they were reducing the carbs, they would experience these low blood sugars because they didn't have the guidance to get on this diet.
Okay.
And other things that would occur with these patients with the low blood sugars was that some of them would say, my blood sugars are always high. You know, so I think, and that's why it's important to highlight that everyone is different, you know. So constipation was one of the things that I would see. Elevated cholesterol too, because people would be, you know, eating all the bacon and all the fats that they wanted. And this will then result to elevated cholesterol. So ultimately those were the things that you would see with these patients. And ultimately you do have some doctors that love the keto, but it's not fit for everyone. And that's why I tell, you know, my patients, when you're thinking about establishing a quote unquote diet, make sure that it's something that you're going to be able to sustain in the long run. You know, make sure that if this is something that you're going to do, it's not going to be a burden to you.
Gotcha.
It's something that is ultimately not going to bring on stress. Because anytime you hear that a specific diet is targeting a specific food group, that's a red flag. And that should be a red flag, because my patients, they eat everything. They have a well-balanced diet, and I never tell my patients, you can't have this. My point is always to allow patients to make the decisions for themselves, but also help them understand food for what it is, how it's going to affect your blood sugar, how we can modify this, and how we could properly pair this to help delay that blood sugar. Yeah. So it can turn out to be healthy. So it's a lot of trial and error, because you might be trying something that you might have heard, oh, hey, you can't have this. And then you try it, you pair it the way that you should, and then you test that blood sugar and you surprise yourself and you're like, wow, my blood sugar is where it needs to be. So I went through all of this, meaning eliminating all these food groups for nothing. Yeah,
and I see that in the gestational diabetes support groups. It's funny sometimes, because a mom will post something like, you know, she had her meal and had brown rice and it worked for her. She had great sugars after. And then another one will say that, you know, she had white rice and she had no problem. And then maybe another one will say, I had 2 bites of rice and my sugar spiked so high, you know? So it's just funny how I shouldn't say finicky. Well, it's funny how different everyone is and how things do affect you. And then, you know, you reminded me of my friend. I have a friend who did keto for a long time, and it was great for her. She lost the weight just like she wanted to. She was losing the baby weight. And then she decided to wean herself off of the keto diet. And she got what she called the keto flu, where she gained the weight back, and her body just went through a bunch of different symptoms that kind of made her feel sick for about a week or so. And then she kind of leveled out, but she started to gain the weight back, or the weight kept coming back, even though she hadn't returned to the normal eating patterns that she had before doing keto. And then, so she got back on the keto diet, and then she got pregnant again. And so she came off of it. And then now her 3 babies are done. She's done having babies, I think. And she returned to the keto diet again after the last pregnancy, but now she's off of it again. And she mentioned that she did go through the keto flu again, but now she's back to a place where she has a good routine with her exercise and whatever she's eating, and she was able to take the weight off and keep it off. But overall, she feels better about being off of the keto diet because she does feel more free in being able to choose what she wants to eat. And she feels better about herself that she's able to control, or not control, but manage her weight the way that she wants to without having to do quote unquote extreme measures. So
That's great.
yeah.
That's great. I think that it all comes down to you finding out what works best for you and what you can, sustain in the long run. Because I think that half of the time individuals are looking for a quick fix. And I usually come across that with my patients where they're on this fad diet, they see those results, but then I see them again and we're back to square one.
Yeah.
And it's so unfortunate because I always emphasize it takes time. And half of the time people are looking for extreme overnight results. And I think that that's why they continue to fall into these systems and diets.
Right. Yeah, and I know for the moms listening, you might not think this is applicable because gestational diabetes only lasts for the period of pregnancy, but there are some moms that want to continue this type of diet as they in postpartum and as they go on. And a lot of people do talk about, going keto or just doing keto because it's easier. It's kind of like a plan for you to follow without you having to figure out a whole lot of stuff. And so these are just some things to consider in case you guys are thinking about doing keto after pregnancy, or just wanting to make any kind of diet change. So fad diets, oh man, they're money makers. Let me say that. That's what they are. The industry has recognized that they're money makers, and that's what they're made for.
I mean, I think the biggest takeaway from our conversation today that I would love for your listeners to understand is that, one, when you're diagnosed with gestational diabetes, it's not your fault. And I work with patients that have gestational diabetes, and I always emphasize it. It's not your fault. So don't put that burden on you like you're doing something wrong, because it's not. The biggest thing is making sure that you are being gracious towards yourself, but also making sure that you're getting those resources that are actually credible. Not just because you're reading it, not just because your doctor is telling you, making sure that when you're trying to make these changes and find a way, that it's something that is going to be sustainable for you during that period. Because that's the biggest thing, where you're always going to hear about something that might be the solution, but I always emphasize, think about the consequences that might bring. When I work with my patients, I help them understand, okay, these are the foods that are going to have an impact on your blood sugars, but just because they're having an impact doesn't mean that you have to eliminate them, because at the end of the day, we need food as energy. And our body uses sugar as energy, whether you like it or not. So it's just a matter of being patient, but also being open to trial and error. So just because you had something that might have given you that number, that quote unquote, and I always say that number because we're always aiming for the perfect. Just because you didn't get that perfect number doesn't mean that there's not room for modification moving forward. Like, always reevaluate and say, what could I have done differently? Don't think automatically, well, I need to eliminate this food. Think, how can I modify this meal so next time I won't come across the same problem?
Right. Cool. Yeah, because I'm thinking I'm from New Orleans, and the number one staple in New Orleans is red beans and rice, you know. Now, I've never really, it's not a staple in my household to where I eat it often, but beans are good, you know. They are carbs, but they're also protein and fiber, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of putting 1 to 2 cups of rice into the bowl of red beans, you know, maybe just half a cup, or, you know, if less. The good thing is that as we check our blood sugars, that's the data that we need that will inform us of changing, of what changes we need to make. And then also sometimes we put sausage in, so that's added protein, you know. But yeah, so that's just one example from where I'm from in my culture. Excuse me. So what are 3, or I don't know if you have 3, but what are a couple of snacks that you are enjoying right now?
Ooh, a couple snacks that I am enjoying right now. One is yogurt. I love yogurt. I love the Siggi's brand. I don't know if the listeners or even yourself have heard of it, but I love Siggi's because it's great in protein. You can get it low fat as well. And it is very satisfying, and it's great for blood sugars. So typically that's one of my go-to. Apples and peanut butter. I love apples and peanut butter. Absolutely love it. It's perfect combination. You know, you have the apple, it's giving you that sweetness, and then you have the peanut butter, which is the protein and the healthy fat. And I would say my last snack, like my go-to snack, I would have to say the kettle chips.
Oh, really? My mom loves those.
I love kettle chips. So let me just say, I love them. Absolutely love them.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great chat. It was very informative. I'm very appreciative. Thank you so much.
Of course, anytime. Thank you so much for having me. And I really hope that this will be, you know, useful for your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. All right, guys. I know that the keto diet is a great thing for many people. And for some people, they're like, I'm not going anywhere near it. I love my carbs. And, you know, it's a little bit controversial, just like any diet. And by no means do I intend for this episode to be controversial. I just want to give you guys a different perspective of what's out there, because a lot of times the keto diet is associated with gestational diabetes as a good thing. And I'm not saying that it's not. You know, in gestational diabetes, you're having to change your diet immediately, and it's a temporary thing and all that. But there are moms that talk about going keto after pregnancy, and even for anyone that is doing keto now and just not pregnancy related, you know, like she said, like Madalyn said, it's a 1-by-1 case. It's a 1-by-1 scenario. Diabetes, there's no one size fits all. And if eating a vastly ketogenic diet or all the way ketogenic diet is working for you, then great. That's awesome. But like I said, this was just to give you another perspective and to inform, because that's what it's about, right? We want to get as much information as we have available so that we can make educated and the best decision for ourselves. So I'm going to link to Madalyn's Instagram page in the notes. Her Instagram, if you want to go straight there, is diabetes.rd for registered dietitian. And also I want to mention our recipe of the week this week. It is a crustless broccoli and cheese quiche. It's super easy to make and it has a little kick to it. So I'll link that in the notes as well. If you guys have any questions or anything you want to add to the conversation, please go to the blog post that's linked in the notes and scroll all the way down to the comments section and leave a comment. Other than that, guys, thanks so much for listening. Do me a favor and leave a rating and a review on iTunes. It would help so much. It'll help more moms see this content. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you next time.